So last week, Suella Braverman had begun to, along with the aid of some of the papers in the right-wing press, had begun to whip up fear that the cenotaph in London was going to be vandalised. The cenotaph is the UK's national war monument. There is a kind of smaller version of these in most towns and villages across the country, in which there's not always flags on them. They're not always quite as tall and grand as this, but they are often made of, I'm guessing this is marble? Some kind of stone, right? They're often made of a very similar thing, and they commemorate people who died, primarily initially in the First and Second World Wars. These days, also people who have died in wars since that. Suella Braverman had been warning about this protest, that the protest was going to conflict with Remembrance Day because it was on Saturday this year, and in particular that the cenotaph was going to get damaged. Some of you will remember this clip from earlier in the week. I'll just play it again very quickly.
She says only the police can apply for a ban.
To be clear, you don't think it should go ahead?
I think I've been pretty clear that these are hate marches. They are, I think, chanting of jihad on the streets of Britain in the 21st century is utterly despicable. And I don't see how any decent person or how the vast majority of the British people...
The reference also to marches for ceasefire being quote-unquote hate marches, that was also quite a controversial intervention from Suella Braverman as well. So she was hinting at wanting to...
There are concerns that the cenotaph could be targeted on Armistice Day. What action should be taken if that happens?
If anyone were to vandalise the cenotaph, they must be put into a jail cell faster than their feet can touch the ground.
So there was all this confected outrage about whether or not the cenotaph was going to get vandalised. And without any real evidence that was kind of a threat. But the papers and Suella Braverman and various other elements of our political establishment wanted to let you know that it was bad if it did happen. This is the march that happened. We'll come on to some of the consequences of that scuffle at the cenotaph later, because there have been some quite large consequences. But the march itself, and I think some of those have overshadowed the march a little bit, but it was humongous. Like, it's kind of interesting to see some of this aerial footage as well, because being on the ground, I think it was hard to get a sense of how big it was. When you're on the ground, you can only kind of see, you know, the 1,000, 2,000, 3,000 maybe people around you. You don't have a sense of this. What I did know is that there was a lot of people, and that meant the crowd was moving slowly. I can try and find a bit more footage. This is a little bit on the ground as well. This is the bridge. This bridge was about halfway along the march route, and I walked for 4.5 hours from the start, and because it was obviously moving a little bit slowly because it was busy, and because there were so many people, I only got to, I don't know if you can see my mouse, I don't think you can, just this little bit before the bridge began.
I've never sort of done any kind of march, never attended anything like this before. But yeah, it was Braverman that made me come out.
And that's interesting, because I did feel that it was a quite broad representation of people that maybe wouldn't always go to this kind of thing. I mean, like, you know, I'm the same. I do not regularly go up to London to these things because it's far, right? It cost me 80 quid on the train, which is not completely, like, is not something I could do every week, right? And so it did feel like a real miss.
Shame on
The one that brought me here today was the attempt to confuse what we're talking about with hate, and the fact that I deeply believe that we're here in remembrance. We're trying to remember the people who are dying today, as well as the people who've died in the past.
My sister's in the military. Today is a really important day for anybody who has lost loved ones in any war to be marching today against this.
Look around you. There's nothing remotely close to any sort of hatred.
It's a peace march. We're here for peace.
This country has hope because it's giving us the right to protest. The government is trying to portray these marches as hate marches,
So this is near the beginning as well. So there was one road that was clearly meant to be the main march road, and then another one running parallel, and it was just so busy that it was spilling over into the other road. And you can see all the coaches as well, which is a sign of like how far people had come, right? That people had come from all across the country to be there.
I'm seeing white people, I'm seeing black people, I'm seeing Muslims, I'm seeing Jews, I'm seeing everyone we're being united as humans. My grandparents, I used to blame them for leaving Palestine in 1948. But now seeing what's happening in Gaza in front of our eyes, anyone looking for their safety and their human rights, right? They will leave. They will leave, and then the future generations are going to blame them. Please be louder than me. What do we want? Ceasefire. What do we want?
Saint Freya saying, someone told me that I'm brave to go to these. It really struck me how different the media portrayal of the marches are to the reality on the ground. Like, yeah, I was talking to people who are, I don't know, I was talking to someone the other day who I could see have, like, it wouldn't have surprised me if they had gone, and someone who knows the kind of people that go to these things, etc., etc. And when I was like, I was in London on Saturday, they're like, you didn't get into any trouble, did you? Was it all okay? It was not even surprising, but it was even though you know sometimes that the portrayal of a certain thing in the media is not accurate to the thing on the ground, it can be really easy to absorb that, right? I've really noticed in the last few weeks the extent to which I don't know if there is any sort of less of it today. Okay, so in the Times you get arrest anti-Semitic mob Yobs, Sunak will tell Met. In the Daily Telegraph you get Braverman, the hate marches must end. We've also seen a lot of framing of calls for a ceasefire as sort of at best naive, or a ceasefire at worst as kind of violent in itself, right? The idea that if you are calling for a ceasefire, what you're really calling for is the destruction of Israel somehow, right? And it's easy to absorb that anyway. And then every so often I'll go and I'll type in the name of a humanitarian charity into Twitter or into Google, and suddenly you go, oh, actually, all of these clear charities and the United Nations, both at an executive level and at a level of the General Assembly, are also calling for a ceasefire as well. That is a normal and humanitarian and humane and human thing to be calling for. Let's try and find some more, and then I'll talk you through. I think, was it King of Barbies that was asking? It wasn't. It was someone else was asking me sort of how my day had gone, what my personal experience of it was, and we'll take a look at that in a second. We'll take a little look at the Al Jazeera
Each
coverage
bouquet
first.
is made.
Paul saying, Tom, what do you think? Is Starmer trying to overcorrect for what he sees as Corbyn being associated with anti-Semitism, or does he think he is being an international statesman, or what? I think there's a mixture of it there. I think there is an extent to which a lot of the Labour front bench, I'll just play this advert through, a lot of the Labour front bench are keen, have this fear that to call for a ceasefire would be to play into ideas that the Labour Party is anti-Semitic. I think there is also an extent at the moment, to which they worry about being seen as caving to the left, right? The Labour Party, as it stands at the moment, is trying to differentiate itself from the Corbyn years, and therefore, if it decides to call for a ceasefire, it potentially makes it look as though it has caved to calls from largely left-wing activists. I don't think that's a good excuse to not do it. So I don't think that there is a reason that we should... I don't think there is any good reason. I think if you're making decisions, based on how you are responding to this crisis, based on your internal party politics or in how things play in the media, then that's bad and wrong, and you have failed yourself and humanity. JDMO3 saying, that's why the phrase humanitarian pause was created, to avoid acknowledging the left is correct. And I think that there is an element of that. I think that so some of you will know that a few days ago Israel agreed to 4-hour-long pauses each day and sort of referred to this as a humanitarian pause. And obviously that's nothing really, right? We're going to not bomb you for 4 hours. That's a cigarette break, right? The context is horrible, right? The reason that everyone's there is not good, but there's something heartening about the fact that so many people were turned out, and so many different kinds of people as well. Like, it really was from babies in prams being pushed by parents to toddlers to elderly people who had decided, potentially despite having slightly decreased mobility, to spend a day walking in a massive crowd for quite
younger, older, from different organisations. The faithful and the secular, all with the same intent.
All along, understandably, quite a large Muslim presence there, and every so often sort of pausing, finding space to pray.
UK's biggest demonstration since the start of the Israeli bombardment of Gaza. Hundreds of thousands of people, many travelling from other parts of the UK, demanding an end to the killing.
There's too many children dying needlessly, totally needlessly, and it needs to stop.
Protest organisers were under intense pressure to postpone or cancel. The Prime Minister said a demonstration would be disrespectful because it coincided.
So the police had sort of instructed them to call it off even at one point. Tau Neutrino, oh, were you there? Oh, that was great. Saying being there was a good reminder that after weeks being told that actually I was the violent / racist one for wanting a ceasefire, that no, it's actually a normal and good thing to want. Yeah, it was really refreshing in that sense. I think in that shot I'm slightly out of frame. Amazing. I'm miles away. I was I'll explain in a minute.
Sided with Armistice Day.
Only just got to
Interior Minister, Home Secretary Suella Braverman even described the pro-Palestinian rallies as hate marches.
It is not a hate march. As you can see, we are not putting up posters that are showing kind of like anti-Semitism. If there was, we would have been showing some sort of anti-Semitism, but there's nothing like that here.
The Cenotaph War Memorial was made part of a police exclusion zone for fear that it might be vandalised, and nearly 2,000 extra police were on duty.
So this was earlier in the day.
There was violence, but it was from far-right white English nationalists who clashed with police and threw bottles and other objects at the officers. The pro-Palestinian marches remained peaceful.
We do also...
People are reasserting the fundamental right to protest, to hold those in power to account, and to march peacefully on the streets, calling for a ceasefire, calling for peace on Armistice Day of all days.
In theory, this stage with the speeches is the central focus of the march, but I never got anywhere near that. I'm just going to pull up a map. By the time I got a couple of streets over, it was already starting to get reasonably busy, right? More and more people, like while I was at the station, it was, normal people around, people who weren't necessarily at the protest. By the time I got closer to the park, it was getting busier and busier. The march started over here in Speaker's Corner. This was sort of the official start of the protest. Redundant proposal saying the logistics of organising that many people must be crazy. Even just standing, they'd occupy a huge area. I mean, what was sort of fascinating about it was that, you've got, none of these even do it justice, none of these pictures, but you've got all of these people, you've got hundreds and hundreds of thousands of people marching along a route, and the number of police officers I saw, the number of volunteered marshals that I saw was absolutely minimal, right? I just didn't see that many at all, and yet the system kind of works. Actually, people are nice, and people are thoughtful, and people will, be nice to one another. So also a lot of people turning up either with a union or turning up on a bunch of trade councils put on coaches from elsewhere in the country. So a lot of people turning up in little groups, and realistically, once you've gathered a bunch of people together like that, some of them are going to be aware of kind of how things work. Some of them are going to have been to these things fairly regularly. But I think it's interesting that most people turning up aren't part of those talks, right? So you don't even necessarily know what the route is or where you're meant to be going. And I think there was a couple of moments where you got somewhere and there was marshals going no, look, it's this way. Obviously you there's nothing stopping you walking that way, but if you want to still be on the march, go this way. So it is sort of fascinating the way in which there is, it just kind of works even without a huge amount of stewardship or even policing, to be honest. So I must have walked over, and I think I came in about here. Yes, I did. So I walked into the park on this gate here because it was all a bit trying to work out exactly where to cross was a bit tough. Can you see my mouse? Yeah, you can. And I must have walked up here, I think, and then across maybe. But by the time I was in the park, it was already just heaving already, and I was sort of in a queue to get to the queue, if that makes, or a march to get to the march maybe. And then we sort of made our way along the park to over here, which was where the march sort of officially started. So this was sort of where your stalls and stuff are, and then the march sort of came down to Hyde Park Corner, which is here. I mean, this took me just to walk down the side of the park took about 2 hours, two and a bit hours. And in fact, the entire day, I just about got to this. I got to this bit of the bridge just before the water, which you can see in some of the footage that the bridge was busy. I think some of the later bits of this footage were on the bridge. But by the time I got there, which was about 5 p.m, I want to say, it was absolutely packed. It wasn't moving any further. So although the stages were, I presume, I don't know, I didn't get there, were in here somewhere. They were by the American Embassy, which I don't know exactly where that is. It's by a little park, I think. I was all the way back here. I never got anywhere near that, which is not a complaint. That is me absolutely saying that is a fascinating and good thing, because it just meant that it had been such a successful and massive turnout, right? But no complaints to the fact I didn't. It was wonderful to just see so many people there and having a good time. Even with such horrific contexts to it, felt heartening to know that